Nightmare is one of the most mysterious animatronics in FNaf 4. He suddenly appears out of nowhere when you're playing Night 7, and he is a transparent and darker version of Nightmare Fredbear. His jump scare is just a single frame of noises, and his labs are so much more different than unlike so Nightmare Fredbear. If you speed up both of their labs, you can hear that Nightmare Fredbear sounds more like a child laughing, while Nightmare sounds more like a madman laughing. But who exactly is Nightmare, and why is he a dark reflection of Nightmare Fredbear? Some people have come up with the idea that he is a representation of death. That does make sense because Nightmare is black, a color that can heavily be associated with death, and with their crying child dying in the hospital, he appears as a representation of him dying from his head injury from the bite of 83, taking a twisted form of a thing he died to. It kinda makes sense until you realize that the crying child isn't the player of FNaf 4. Why isn't he the player of FNaf 4, you may ask? Well, the survival logbook, a book previously owned by Michael, has him answering questions to a spirit, presumably the fifth spirit of Golden Freddy, Cassidy. She writes, "Do you have dreams?" and Michael writes either Nightmare or Nightmare Fredbear. Can't tell which one it is because they look the exact same and it isn't colored. But the important thing is that the survival logbook confirms that Michael is the player of FNaf 4. So Nightmare being the representation of death of the player doesn't exactly work because Michael isn't close to death. I know. Michael was pretty close to death at one point, but this is after Sis' location and his whole experience of being turned into a corpse. So, besides him being a zombie, Michael is fine. He isn't going to die, at least anytime soon. But if Nightmare isn't a representation of death, what could he possibly be? Well, the biggest Nightmare theory is the theory that Nightmare is actually Shadow Freddy. At first you may be like, what exactly is the evidence of this? The evidence is actually from FNaf 4's files. If you check the files for FNaf 4 using Click Team Fusion, the button for the Night's Nightmare happens to appear in are called Shadow Freddy. Yeah, this means that only the night is called Shadow Freddy and not Nightmare himself, but the way the game activates Nightmare on those nights is with the Shadow variable, meaning that the Shadow Freddy button does have something to do with Nightmare specifically. The icing on the cake is that the Nightmare and 420 custom night button that are named Shadow Freddy uses the Shadow variable to turn on Nightmare. And before anyone tries to discredit the evidence by saying that Scott didn't intend for people to decompile his code, Scott said, quote unquote, "I don't think any developer likes to have his game decompiled, but it's a reality of the internet. I've come to accept it, leaving little Easter eggs for people who do it." So yes, Scott knows we decompile his games and he intentionally leaves stuff behind for us. There's a lot more outside of just FNaf 4's files to suggest that these two are the same person. You know how in FNaf 2, Shadow Freddy is just a recolor of Golden Freddy? Look at Nightmare and Nightmare Fredbear. He is just a recolor of Fredbear, but shadowy. The very last piece of evidence that supports these two being the same person is UCN. When you die to Nightmare, he says, "I am your wickedness, made of flesh." The definition of wickedness is just evil or morally wrong, and every time William commits a crime, Shadow Freddy appears in some way, representing his crimes. Just like in FNaf 2 after he kills the DCI, Shadow Freddy appears in Parts and Services. And in FNaf 3, Shadow Freddy appears to lure the missing children, and FNaf 6 confirms that Shadow Freddy is a creature connected to William in some way, since Henry calls Shadow Freddy some kind of trap that William set up. So why would Shadow Freddy be in Michael's dreams if he is someone or something that wants to work with William? I think that the reason he decides to go into Michael's dreams is because he's an agony creature who wants to feast on Michael so he can power himself, so he decides to invade Michael's memories. I believe that the dreams of FNaf 4 are something Mike was intentionally putting himself into, since the FNaf movie, which Scott said can answer questions to the games, has Michael taking sleeping pills to be able to relive memories of the past. And if you play FNaf 4, notice how there are sometimes pills sitting right next to the bed. I think at some point William decides to put Michael in the experiment rooms to test out the hallucinogenic gas on Michael, to see whether the experiment rooms could actually work, and once he sees that it does, he decides to remove Michael and then add other children. Michael is trying to remember those times in experiment rooms since it could possibly help him have a lead towards his father, and Shadow Freddy decides to take advantage of this and invade his dreams and take the form of Nightmare. We see something similar happen in the movies where the missing children kids invade the memories of Michael when he is sleeping. But this is at least what I think Shadow Freddy's role is in FNaf 4. Some people think that Michael was never in experiment rooms and it was just Shadow Freddy giving the memories of the rooms, but tell me what you guys think in the comments below, and I'll see you guys next time.